All right. Anyone else? All right, we'll close that portion. All right, I shuffled my papers and hid the agenda. Here it is.
If we could, I don't see the engineer Ron Key, doesn't seem to be here yet, so he would be on the
We'll move it
first.
down.
If you can
So we'll go
postpone
to
that.
item B. We'll put A at the bottom of that list. So, discussion, or this is a resolution. Let me read the resolution. Keep that one out of the way for a minute. A resolution authorizing the town manager to execute a memorandum of agreement between the town of Signal Mountain and the Signal Mountain Elementary Preservation Fund for the completion of a capital improvement project to install an HVAC system in the auditorium/theater of the former Signal Mountain Elementary School building. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Discussion.
If I might, in the last meeting, we were asked to develop this MOA that would allow, at least on the front end, a cooperative project to get the HVAC installed, and then ultimately the Preservation Fund would reimburse the town's contribution. Initially, you have in the packet, the project was estimated to be about $50,000. We're just above 60 now, I believe. And one of the things, once the cost of the project moved up, anything above $50,000 for a public facility requires that it be engineered. We have a firm that we've used for these types of projects, and we asked them for a proposal to do that engineering, and just got that back late Friday. And that's an additional $76.50 for the engineering services to do mechanical, electrical, and structural engineering for the HVAC system. So that is an additional cost on that. So that's come in since we started this process. When we drafted this, knowing that, you know, those numbers have been relatively fluid up to this point and may continue to be, so we will ultimately have to have the project spec, do the bid documents on it and bid it out, and it won't be until then that we actually know the full cost. So the resolution is to execute the memorandum, which is basically an in-principle document. Once the bid that's done, that gives us the go-ahead to move forward with the bid specs and all of that, get the engineering done. Once the bid process comes in, then we will be coming back to do
The resolutions for.
the addendum to the agreement that has the final numbers on that. After that, ultimately, the council will also have to approve awarding the bid, the contract for the project. So there are a few, for lack of a better term, safety valves along the way as we move forward that we'll continue to have to review it, make sure where we are, and then get further authorization to move forward.
I talked to the potential HVAC contractor, and the cost of the engineering, was a concern, but he told me that the package system, without getting into all the technical stuff, the package system on top of the building will cost significantly less. So even though the engineering costs go up, the equipment costs are going to go down some. We just don't know what those numbers are just yet. But he used the word significant, and I asked him,
So that's more than $1.50, right?
yes.
What's a packaging system on the roof?
It's
Is that
a-
something that's
It's a
supposed to
unit
be on the ground?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you can put a package system on the ground. A package system, basically, everything's contained, and the plenum and the ductwork leaves from that. a split system. The compressors are outside,
Oh.
and there's an air handler that, or two that get hung in different, various places, so.
There's
This-
there's no logical place there to, well, there's plenty of logical places to install the system. It's just, where's it going to go so that it doesn't detract from the building itself?
Oh.
And it doesn't impede any of the fire access exit in the back or anything. So
Uh-huh.
on the roof, then,
Well, that makes sense.
yeah, it does.
So, want to check again, Harry. I'm married to Angie, who is the president of the Signal Mountain Elementary Preservation Fund. If I recuse myself from this, we don't have enough people to vote. Do you think I need to?
Sure would prefer there be 4 votes up beside, 3 votes besides you. Yeah, probably so. I think you better off with a majority, with a quorum without you.
Yeah.
So, hopefully, we can move forward with the folks that we're talking to without this and just move, table this and move it to next time? Do we need to vote to table it? We didn't?
Yes, you do.
Okay.
And you have a motion already on the table.
Oh, right.
Oh, we
So
do.
you
Mhm.
need to, you need to vote to pass that.
So who,
She moved.
so you need to rescind your motion?
I need, okay, should
Well,
I say I
wait a minute.
vote, or should I?
If you're not going to vote tonight, maybe she doesn't.
We just need to rescind
But-
the,
It's
We
ti-
can't leave the motion, there was a motion and a second to pass the resolution.
Oh, there is.
Who was,
No,
who
you-
was, who was the motion?
Yeah, was it,
Susanna.
Susanna,
It
your
was me.
motion?
that was
to-
my motion. So
Okay,
can I make
good.
a,
That's got to be rescinded.
Just-
so what?
Just rescinded.
Oh, so
Move to rescind.
I move to
your-
rescind.
And then you also have
I rescind my second.
Learned something new tonight.
Yes, we did.
I move that we table this resolution till the next meeting.
Okay.
So moved.
So,
Right, are we voting on
second?
that?
Okay.
you're going to table, and who is the second? Who seconded it?
Oh.
You did.
Pointed at each
Whichever
other.
one didn't move.
I wrote down Susanna, is that correct?
That works, yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So the next one is, hopefully everyone had a chance to read the MAC revised strategic plan. Does anybody have any particular questions on it? The MAC board's been very active lately and lots of stuff going on there, and it's nice to see the plan and a plan to implement the plan.
Yep.
Do we have a motion? Oh, I should read it.
Yeah.
A resolution adopting the 2019 revised strategic plan for the Mountain Arts Community Center.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Now, I don't think we have to recuse anyone for this.
I don't either.
Nah. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Carries 3-0. So are we ready now? Well, let's do this last one because it'll be fast. Next, we have a resolution authorizing the town manager to submit an application for the Public Entity Partners Driver Safety Matching Grant Program. Is this one we did last year? And we get free money for
several
it?
years. We use this, it pays 100% of our driver's license checks we run on all employees that drive town vehicles. It pays for that, and we use what's left to offset some of the cost of our GPS units.
For your motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Carries 3-0. So we're moving back up. I assume you're with CTI?
Apparently this shut off too. Everything got tired. Mhm.
Did you hit there's a power button on
Okay,
top of
you-
the,
It's coming,
it's coming.
so you should be good to go.
There you go, Ron.
Where does this go?
Probably over here.
Take this one out.
That's your remote. So let's go over here. Here. Yeah.
So to bring us up to date, this came up last week, and some citizens, and I'm included in that, have some concerns about the quality of the job, and then to have an additional payment, which I understand the changes that were made, but I'd like to know how the road is made better, because it's rough right now. And I looked at some standards, some TDOT standards, and I understand probably that contract didn't apply to this, that show in the span of 12 feet, 4/10 of an inch dip outside of that tolerance is considered to be not acceptable. I used a 6-foot straight edge and got 7/8 of an inch in one spot. There were several other places on the side going towards Alexian. That side is much worse than the side coming back from Alexian. It looks like they were two different pours, but it looks like the standards were different. The side going towards Alexian has a lot of cuts in it. And I don't know if you have the photos that I sent you, and where there are even some large pieces of concrete that are basically not connected, on any side. There's a big triangle cut that was one of the pictures.
There
Kind of
is,
a break.
having
me see if I
trouble
can-
getting this started. I'm sorry, Lloyd.
And again, this is an awkward thing, but it cost us $1 million.
Yes.
So what we expect out of that is a smooth road. And I know one of the workers mentioned to a citizen walking by that on the side going toward Alexian, they used some of the old street. They broke some stuff up and used that for fill, and that was maybe what started some of the cracking, and you changed it on the other side and didn't have that cracking coming back.
We did not use the old material, to my knowledge. As you recall,
I might have some photos of that too. But anyway,
Okay.
go ahead.
What did you want up here first?
this will be fine first.
And for the citizens' sake who aren't familiar with this whole thing, the ordinance before us is an ordinance to amend ordinance number 2019. Is that the wrong one?
Resolution.
Here, I put it aside. Here we go. A resolution authorizing additional funds for the contract with Thomas Brothers Construction Company in an amount not to exceed $84,000 to cover unanticipated additional cost associated with the James Boulevard replacement project. Boyd, what is our total cost on that so far? I didn't ask you to get that.
No,
It's about $1 million. isn't
It is
Just
Close.
slightly more than $1 million right
Okay.
now.
right in there.
Let me just briefly walk through this, Mayor and Council. The yellow represents the westbound lane of the north side of the road. We started at the upper end and started working down, removing the old pavement. And that work began the Monday after Thanksgiving. And the end of that week and the next weekend is when the rains all started. And we just they removed the old pavement and then got into a quagmire for much of all winter. We met with contractors, we met lots of people, talked about different options. One option would have been to undercut, dig out the old wet soils, build it back with large rock, build a base back. The problem with that was we didn't know how deep we had to go. We had to had no knowledge of, what it was going to take to firmly stabilize that, and we had no way to control the cost. The contractors came back and offered an option, and I think this method has been used on some other roads on Signal Mountain. We've used it in some other places. It's called cement soil stabilization. It's also known as full depth restoration. You dig it out, you amend the soil with cement. The machine is a huge machine, but it's got a wheel that turns, mixes the cement and the soil together and put it back in place, relatively dry, and then they roll that with a heavy-duty road roller to densify it and repact it back in place. And the cement in that essentially sets up. And so everything in yellow was done with that method. When we got down to Alexian and we were coming back the other side, by the time they started that work, and to do that, the work on the north side, we negotiated a net zero change order with the contractor. That would be no additional cost to the city. And there would be, we anticipated that we would use the same method on the eastbound side, eastbound lane, or on the south side. And we were hoping not to have to use that because everything that led us to believe that the south side would be much firmer, more solid material. And part of that was based upon the experience when we put the water line in about 3 years ago. And the contractor hammered rock basically from one end to the other. And so there was all indications that we were going to be in solid substrate the entire way. Well, we started right around Alexian and the intersection of Signal Point Road, and it was wet, even though the rainy conditions had abated, but it was very wet. And so we thought, we would undercut this.
I'm sorry.
Undercut that and put surge stone in there, build it back up. But we anticipated that in a very short distance we would run out of that soft material. Well, we ran into the soft material about right here, about 500 feet into that work. And then from there to here, about another 250 feet, the half lane was in soft material and the other lane was in very firm material. So it was something beyond our control. We kept, proceeding forward, trying to work our way out of that, but it just kept moving with us. And it was totally unexpected and unknown based upon conditions that we had seen with the water line. In fact, in part of this area here, we found the water line in solid rock, and it was that far from soft material. So it's in rock trench here and only that far from soft material. But anyway, that's what transpired there. Unfortunately, that was very costly for the contractor to undercut, put the stone down, and it was like the last 2 weeks of work, and so it didn't become apparent ahead of time so that we could control the cost and be able to track that cost until it had already been, that we'd already been incurred that cost. And that was very unfortunate. We were trying to track it all the way through. And had we used either the modified soil amendment on both sides, we would have been under cost, or if this had been in solid material all the way through, we would have used standard base stone and probably decreased the cost quite a bit. It was something that was totally unexpected and almost impossible to track.
I could ask questions as someone who's not an engineer that wouldn't really make a difference. I mean, it seems like coring and those kinds of things could take place to,
Well, we talked about coring the project, but once again, based upon the information that we had when we put the water line in, we felt like that would have been an expenditure that would not be needed, because basically I had, the contractor told me, my senior project manager on the water line, our field service inspector, and the inspector on the job, plus some people in your water department, all said that it was solid rock on the south side. So we did not make the call to do drilling on that part, because the conditions, you know, and we fully expected to be in rock pretty much on both sides.
and the south side, is the finished job on it? It's fine. It's the side going to Alexian that has the problems. It's the first side that has the problems. I mean, you've seen it, haven't you?
I have. I drove it again today. In fact, I checked it today in the rain to make, we worked very hard to make sure water didn't pond. Water's not ponding, it's at one
Yeah,
spot.
well, it's wide and it slopes, but
But-
as somebody who rides it every day, it's a relief when you're going towards Alexian to get it off back onto the cheap asphalt because it's smooth again. Or if you ride behind someone and watch the back ends of their cars, it's not just that one spot that I showed, that I gave you a picture of. There's a few of those going down there. And in particular, it concerns me that there's so many cracks in it. And in addition to that, I think when you guys got done in time for our Fourth of July, which everybody was happy with that, I assumed that you were coming back to grind, with a diamond grinder to at least smooth the road out, and then do some edging. I'm surprised that there's not edging along the concrete where it hits the tracks. In some places it actually goes on it. It's just the rough edge, and then in other places there's concrete that's smeared on the tracks. It seems like that would be a finished job for $1 million.
Well, there are a couple points there. One, the first, well, when we laid the project out, we would have expansion joints on 50-foot centers. We put additional saw cuts or construction joints on 15-foot centers. And
Sleep.
did I do that? I'm sorry.
I think so.
I think today is Monday. I'm
Yes,
sorry.
it's okay.
But we put construction joints on 15-foot centers, and I've got a picture. Well, I don't have a picture of it. I ran out of time and didn't get all the pictures made this afternoon I wanted. But when we tied the rails together, there is a coupling about this long that was bolted to each side of the rail to keep it in alignment, keep it in place. And we anticipated that when that coupling, concrete was poured around the coupling, that we might have some cracks there. So we went to the leading edge of that coupling, each coupling. The first two pours we made, we had breaks at the downward edge of the coupling. And so they were uncontrolled breaks.
There are some that even go up through the curbs. There's
Right.
some breaks that went all the way up into the curbs.
It was remarkable that they would transient that far. We started not only putting a control joint at the beginning of the coupling, but on each end of the coupling, and that controlled the uncontrolled cracking from that point forward. So then they came back and put additional saw cuts on every coupling all
You can
along
see
the
in
road.
places where they're about 3 feet apart.
Sometimes they're about, 2.5, 3 feet apart. And one of the worst places that you talked about where the dip is in front of 311 James Boulevard, there is a control joint next to the coupling about this far from, about a foot or so from an expansion joint. And then on the other side, there is another control joint. And there was an uncontrolled crack right between those. And that must have been, and that is also over a water service and a gas service. When we did that work with the cement stabilization, wherever the surfaces were, we couldn't do that method right at the surfaces. They would stop just short of the surfaces on each side. And then they would dig that out, put in stone, and build it back up with the traditional method around the service lines. And that apparently is a weak spot and allowed the road to settle on that gas service. And we've talked to the contractor. He's going to come back and dig that out and replace that section.
Is that the triangle section?
Yes,
Yes. Because that's a complete free
yes,
floating piece of concrete there.
Yes, it is.
Will shift.
yes, it is. We agree totally with that. And the contractor has agreed to that also.
What is our recourse to make sure that contractor does that?
Well, the project won't be complete and final payment won't be made until it's done.
What about the, I know that grinders exist for concrete jobs, and they use them all the time to smooth out those kinds of things.
We are checking on the pricing on that. There are not very many firms that do that. It's a firm up near Knoxville. Nobody locally that does that I'm aware of.
I just gave you, right before the meeting, Ron came up and provided me with a letter, and I've forwarded it to you, and we'll make it available if anybody else wants it, but basically explained some of these issues. And one of the things that he explained was
Oh, I see the hand troweling.
yeah, the hand troweling that was done on this project as opposed to machine finishing
Yeah.
was a huge difference in cost. And if you recall, we had two contractors that bid this. The other one was significantly higher, but included that machine finishing where this one did not.
Right, but, I mean, I've put in driveways, and there's edge-over trowels, that roll the edge, and this is just rough concrete in some sections where it's just, it hasn't been troweled. It's maybe, if somebody troweled it, they used a straight edge over it, to make it be straight, then the concrete's coming onto the tracks. $1 million.
Well, I understand that. What we may want to do is get with Dan and people at the utilities department and sit down and have some more discussions with the contractor. I think that would probably be appropriate.
Yeah. And I know it just seems like I'm perhaps being a jerk at this
No,
point,
no,
but
not at all.
this
If I were in your
is,
shoes, I would be,
yeah, I mean, our citizens drive down that road as a project that took a long time, and it looks, it's pretty, but it's just surprising when you hit that, and then it's boom, 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 all the way down. It's just
Mayor, we
surprising.
also think that the number of control joints that we had impact not only the ride, but also the noise that you would have going over that. And there are a number of control joints that are pretty close together. And we've talked about grinding that down. The contractor's a little concerned trying to grind the control joints and smooth those down. He's afraid that they might break off and migrate and get larger. Right now, they're very tight, neat
Right.
control joints, but he's concerned about breaking those loose.
So I understand, the added expense for the stone. I mean, I understand that. That kind of thing happens. I was confused, though, when you said you had a no-change bid.
A net zero change
A net
order.
zero change bid, because,
We changed the methodology and
but it's not net zero to us.
well, that was months ago when we authorized the cement soil stabilization.
That was for the other side of the road.
Okay.
Basically the north side of the road. Anytime you have a major change order like that, even if there's no change in cost, it's a change in methodology, and we needed to get that approved by the council and also by TDOT.
So this is for the side going to Alexion. This is for all the extra stone.
The additional change order is primarily on the side coming away from Lexington.
Coming away
That
from-
is,
Okay, I'm mixing
The
up the two
blue.
sides.
the blue, yes.
This, I'm kind of naive about this kind of thing, but do you get like a warranty with a job of this scope? So that if there are cracks in the concrete and things like that?
It's
that-
under warranty for a year.
Okay. I was curious.
And Mayor,
How will we, I just think with the rains and that, the terrain over there is sort of hilly. There's just a lot of cracks in the sidewalks and all of that. So I was curious, because it does sound like a little bit precarious if you try to smooth it and then it starts cracking. And then one crack leads to another crack. Is that when do you get in a scenario where a warranty situation would need to be addressed? I guess, how do you know?
That is almost a judgment call, and it's a little hard to say, you know, is one crack too many or two cracks too many? It's hard to say that, but I think
It's
it's a
surprising,
generality.
yeah, it's surprising to see any cracks to the person who's buying it.
Right.
You probably, if this was your house and your marble countertop had issues like this, you'd think, wait a second,
Sure,
that's expensive.
absolutely. Mayor, you mentioned the rails. In the sort of the eastern edge or eastern end of the project, where a number of cars are traveling over the median,
Okay.
they worn the concrete off the rail surface, which is what we were expecting. At the western end, there are fewer cars to cross that median. I've looked at it the last few weeks, and I think some of the concrete is wearing off, but it's taking longer for it to wear off. We expected the car traffic to wear the concrete off the very top of the rails. We were concerned about saw cutting or anything because, again, the concrete is a little bit brittle. If we saw it, we're concerned that it might crack and allow water down between the concrete and the rail. Right now, the concrete is adhered to the rail, and it seems to be very solid and firm with just a few places, and you show pictures of those. And those places are like steel nodules that were sticking out on the old rail, and there was not much concrete on top, so it basically flaked off. And we're going to go back and treat that with epoxy and try to seal that back off. But again, we were trying to work with the old rails. It was a challenge to be able to use the old rails and develop a way to hold them in place while the concrete is poured. And I think the contractors did a very good job of that. But we're working through some other issues here.
So what do we need to do to if we approve this resolution, it doesn't pay out until the job's done?
I think we're pretty close to pay out on the
We're-
existing contract, so this is an additional fund. And if they're coming back to redo work, then at least my position is that the contract isn't complete.
Is
So-
or isn't?
Is not. Do you have any idea on timeline for that work?
I think they can do that pretty quickly. I can't speak for them, but I think they are prepared to be back quickly.
You know, and I think
It's
that's the
it's
thing
in their
that-
interest to do that too, so that you're basically holding their last payment.
So if you brought the contractor back to have a conversation with, would it be with officials from Signal Mountain and then your company and then the contractor as well? So maybe,
Yes,
yeah. I mean, I think that sounds like a a good idea.
Say that again.
He said that he could bring the contractor for a meeting
Right.
with our town officials, so,
And we discussed that earlier today as well, and we're hoping maybe next week, if not late this week, next week, we might be able to schedule that. We'll see
Right.
how scheduling for some other staff members works, but
mhm.
we'll do that. You know, and they're related but unrelated,
Yeah,
you know. And we have a meeting about every 2 weeks, thereabouts. And it's certainly a pleasure of council whether you move forward with this. Now, again, an authorization doesn't mean an automatic payout. But if we're going to be meeting with them shortly and anticipate that additional work I would be surprised if it was within 2 weeks. It may not be much of an issue to postpone action on it.
When
either.
is your next council meeting?
2 weeks.
2 weeks from tonight.
Is it normal, because this was something that you were hit with by one of your contractors, this 82,000, right? That came in after we had already paid that month's bill, is that correct? Is it normal for that kind of thing to happen? I mean, that's,
No, we can normally anticipate ahead of time. But in this, because they were moving, we talked to them about getting Faultless back to do the soil stabilization. And they were saying that they would be a minimum of 6 weeks out before we could do that. So, again, you know, it was hard to get them to mobilize to come, thinking they would do a 50-foot strip and then leave and come back and do another 50-foot strip as we dug it out. You know, it was just impractical to, you know, we just had to keep going, hoping and anticipating that we were about to hit solid substrate.
so, the resolution that we have before us is to pay that overage. And if you read through some of this, it's obvious why this is here. There's a part of me that wonders, and I guess, Harry, I'm trying to figure this out. Do we want this for leverage?
Well, this doesn't authorize payment at this point. I mean, if this were approved, you don't have to pay it now. But I really don't see any reason in deferring action on this resolution for 2 more weeks. I mean, you can do it either way. I don't see a problem approving it now or deferring it for 2 weeks.
We can.
I think that's whichever the council wants to do.
Mayor,
Is
one-
there like a is there like a punch list of things? It sounds like we've got like different areas on the road that have issues.
Oh, for the most part,
So-
that's been done and resolved, except for these, really, there's
these-
a couple
these
particular issues.
items
Tracking.
came in after we had done a walkthrough and prepared
Oh,
a
right,
punch
okay.
list.
Is
But we
there a
can
bump
modify that.
spec?
Pardon me?
Is there a bump spec on the project?
No, sir.
That, because it's so short?
No, because under TDOT's rules, they enforce a bump spec on what they called mainline pavement. There's another clause in there that doesn't apply. And then also they enforce bump spec on bridges and ramps that exceed 40 miles per hour. And
Would you consider 7/8 inch in the course of 6 feet dip to be acceptable?
probably not. But it's, you know, how frequent, you know, and again, if you look at TDOT spec, it builds up to, if you do the profile test, builds up like accumulates over 9 inches over a mile. So that 7/8 in one spot, in and of itself, wouldn't meet the criteria of a problem. But when you
Of
build up,
failing a
when you
bump spec,
accumulate
yeah.
over so many inches in that mile.
But it becomes
then
worse within it when it's rough in a short span,
that-
you know,
that is
multiple in the short span. you notice it.
And it's just perception. And again, we feel like that some of the problem is related to the number of control joints that we had to have in there to try to,
But you don't have those control joints on the other side of the road. The cuts that you said you made where the bolts are.
I thought they were there.
I don't think so. Maybe I'm wrong. I'll check.
I may be wrong too, Mayor. I haven't looked at the south side
Yeah.
as much
I think
because
those are
it didn't-
larger-
It didn't demand as much attention
Right.
as the north side.
All right, I make a motion that we, have I read it yet?
Have you read it?
Have I read it? I think I did, but I'll read it again. A resolution authorizing additional funds for the contract with Thomas Brothers Construction Company in an amount not to exceed $84,000 to cover unanticipated additional costs associated with the James Boulevard replacement project. Do I hear a motion?
You just said you moved.
Well, now we have to do it again, giving someone else an opportunity.
So moved.
Second.
All right, any additional discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Carries 3-0.
And you
And-
guys are going to meet in the next couple of weeks?
As soon as we can
Got it.
schedule it.
Look forward to
Got
that.
it.
Thank you. All right, we move on to ordinances now. And this will be the first chance that we've had to see this. I wish we had had this information. And you're going to put this with the packet on the website.
Sure. So we just got that this afternoon.
All right. This is an ordinance to amend ordinance number 2019-13 entitled the fiscal year 2019-2020 budget ordinance to provide for certain additional revenues and expenditures in this budget year. What all do we have in here, Boyd?
The vast majority of this are carryovers, one being funds for the tennis court, HVAC in the gym, work on the police department, parking lot, things such as that were budgeted last year, but we weren't able to complete. In the budget re-estimate, we held those as being expended so that the money could be moved over to this year without it having an impact on the budget overall.
Right.
So there's that. We have a couple of donations and grant funds that are in here as well. Beyond that, any other detail, myself or Carol, as she puts this together, might be best to go through it. But again, with a couple exceptions of grants and donations and the funds, how those funds will be expended, pretty much all related to carryover from last year for projects that we want to attempt to complete in this budget year.
Do we hear a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? This obviously doesn't lock us into spending any of this.
No. It allows us the opportunity. Appropriates the funds. Most of these larger projects you will see again if they go forward because you'll have to approve the expenditure.
Any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Carries 3-0. All right, discussion, debt service policy. So we had a discussion with Carol and Boyd about this. What the state says and what this debt service policy says is that we have to review it on an annual basis. And when I was going over it, one of the obvious questions that came up was it mentions a 25% 2-year 25% to your budget.
Your debt
Yeah,
shouldn't, and it's a good point right up front, is that throughout this policy, you will see things like the town will strive to and will try to, and basically the policy says that we will make the effort to see that our outstanding debt outstanding debt obligation does not exceed 25% of our operating budget.
so before Boyd steps on the punchline,
Sorry?
what is our outstanding debt percentage?
Currently, it is 62%, and has been for well over a decade.
So the problem with it, the way that it's written, and this is something that we can change, is that number doesn't really matter. What matters is what your debt service cost. And our job is to review this debt service policy, and this is probably one of the things that should be changed. That should reflect, and I've asked Carol if she could find out if there's some accounting standard for a small municipality, what would a good debt service to budget ratio be, just to see where we are.
Right now, our current debt service is 4.58% of our budget, so it's very low. This is something I've suggested in the past, in that, right now we have right at $6 million in debt, and we have $393,255 in debt service budgeted. That's manageable. If you change the term on that same debt, the debt service becomes absolutely unmanageable. So that's why that debt to budget ratio doesn't really make any sense, because depending on the term, it may be something the town can manage reasonably, and it may not be. So if you look at how much debt service you carry relative to your budget, that really gives you a better idea of what impact it's having on your ability to operate.
So, and if you when you look at it, that 25% seems strange anyway, but if you change the wording in that so that you're talking about debt service, 25% debt service to budget would be way out of whack also.
Mm-hmm.
So can we try to reword this
Mhm.
and then look at it next week?
We can
And
look
we
at
have
that.
fulfilled what the comptroller says we should do by having this discussion. The rest of this is boilerplate information about how you borrow and making sure that nobody's
Where is the 25%?
self-taught. That line?
Is it in this document?
Yeah. It's towards,
It is on page
Page
2.
2, types and limits of debt.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
the town will
I
seek
gotcha.
to limit total outstanding debt obligations to 25% of budgeted operating expenditures, excluding overlapping debt, enterprise debt, and revenue debt.
This document was also drafted in the days of a totally different investment culture than we have today.
Yeah.
One of the other
There's the-
suggestions here is that we limit our variable rate debt, and the high school loan was variable rate, and they purchased a rate cap on that. The 2015 note that's outstanding now is variable rate. When we went out to get that, you couldn't get a fixed rate. The market was so volatile, they just wouldn't issue it. You were going to get variable rate debt, or you weren't going to get it. That's when we decided to go out and get a bond rating. We did that, and that dropped not only the rate on the new loan, but even dropped the rate on the high school loan that was outstanding. Now the high school loan's been retired. The 2017 note qualifies as fixed rate, but it does have a 7-year review cycle on it. So right now, a little less than half of our debt is fixed rate. A little more than is fixed rate. but that was dictated by the market, not by the choice that we could make.
Because this is, it's worded not like a directive, it says we recognize the value of variable rate debt obligations, and that cities have greatly benefited from the use of variable rate debt and the financing of needed infrastructure and capital improvements. However, the town also recognizes there are inherent risks associated with the use of variable rate debt and will implement steps to mitigate these risks. Are you concerned that that's too strong, that is this saying that if we are following our debt policy, we are trying to get rid of our variable rate, which is actually pretty good?
No, I think ultimately, if you look at the policy as a whole, it says that we will evaluate the market, our outstanding debt, and opportunities for refinancing and all, which, if it came down to it, is exactly what we would do. Right now, the position we're in, the debt we have is a favorable scenario. And if that changes, then we'll look at ways to remedy that.
But do you think this wording needs to change? Because it does give us leeway.
Again, with
Yeah,
it,
so-
you get into the, we'll seek to limit.
Right. Number two is a good example. Prior to entering into any variable rate debt obligation that is backed by insurance and secured by a liquidity provider, the council shall be informed of the potential effect on rates as well as any additional costs. It's, yeah.
We look at it each year as part of the budget process.
Yeah.
That's our requirement to review it. Doesn't mean we have to change it.
But we should.
We've reviewed it in the past and had these same discussions, and I don't know if it's a decision or just ultimately the end result was that changes weren't made. So I think this would be a good opportunity to address those, at least that particular issue.
So this is nothing we need to vote on?
No, until there is a change.
Right.
I think we have satisfied our obligation to review it, and now we will look at potential wording for changes and bring that back, and then at that point there will be a vote to adopt new language for the policy.
Okay.
The next item for discussion is schedule of council work sessions, and I think this was something that Amy had asked to be on here, and she's not here this evening, so,
Can we hold that?
yeah, let's hold that. Let's jump to the last one, because that'll only take a moment, and then we'll do the one that'll take a bit. We have a DRC application for Jeremy Rardon. Do you have anything to add to this? You're the chair of the DRC.
This is basically, as the last application, we had an opportunity to get it before council. Why it's not on with a resolution to appoint would suggest that we take the same approach and forward this to Ed, and he can forward as he wishes to DRC members and look at it for, it's an application for.
It's an app, okay. Yeah.
Right. So we can do that. And then between now and the next meeting, they will have the opportunity to review it, as will council, and can contact or discuss or whatever you wish, and we'll have a resolution.
I'm Ed Garby, 502 Signal Mountain Boulevard. So are you forwarding me names, or are you
We have one
recommendations from
application.
us?
We have one person who's applied for the DRC,
Yeah,
so we can forward you that application, and you would have the opportunity to contact them. And,
okay. I thought maybe that was a town council member that did that, but,
well,
or maybe
it is.
as
The
well.
town council appoints,
Okay.
but
We want to,
of late, they have valued the input of the committee.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's it.
okay.
All right, thanks.
Well, there will be two positions on the DRC open, correct?
Because she's
Because
leaving.
if I'm taking Dr. Spalding's spot and he was a liaison,
Right.
and before I was on it as a DRC member, so I need to switch to liaison, which opens up two positions.
So there
There are two.
was an existing, and then your position
Mhm,
is the
correct.
second.
Mhm.
Okay.
Do you need one more?
Do we have to do anything formally for her to not be on what she was on? change your meds.
Do we,
That always works.
I mean, I think by default, coming on the council disqualifies her from holding an actual membership position, but at the same time, it might not hurt to just have an email for the file or something, says you're stepping down from
Okay,
that.
I can
Again,
do
I
that.
don't
And
necessarily
planning
think it's
commission. And planning
required, but
commission.
it wouldn't hurt.
Okay, I can do that.
All right. So, next discussion item is amending municipal code, Title 8 alcoholic beverages, Chapter 2 beer. And some, I'll open this up with some general considerations. And just to say our task tonight is not to change or vote on anything. It's just to find out areas, get some feedback that can be changed. So here's my list. General considerations. 1, allow smaller businesses in existing storefronts. And you would do that by changing the number of seats and potentially even the meals requirement rules. Just to take a look at that. That's 1. 2, change the beer alcohol content to reflect modern standards. 3, and these are going to start getting more complicated, standardize rules for the MAC, the library, and Signal Mountain Playhouse. Those are our town's 3 places where you might want to hold fundraisers to try to support those entities. And we can come back and talk about any of these. I'll just jump through them quickly. Then I have a heading called differentiate, and under that, consider an annual license for, and I've got 4 things, community-based and licensed nonprofit fundraising organizations like Signal Mountain Playhouse, MEF, SMEPF, Sports Boosters, Social Services, any of those kinds of organizations that might want to have fundraisers where you might want to have alcohol at the event. 2, no alcohol sales unless it's a licensed business, like a beer truck or something's on premise. That these organizations aren't selling alcohol
And no alcohol sales unless what?
unless it's a licensed business that's
Okay.
selling, which sort of keeps it lined up with what we have. That, yeah, we can discuss this more in a minute.
So
but
beer
I
truck,
see the hairy eyeball coming out.
No, I'm just,
so like a beer truck or hiring a bartender, does that count?
You'll still have to do that.
Still have to do that?
That's a separate
Okay.
thing. Alcohol can be included in event ticket price, which is the way they do it in Chattanooga for some of these things. So you're not selling alcohol, but in your ticket price, you're allowed to have alcohol. So, yeah, it's going to be fun to try to figure it out. I know. These are just ideas. And I think we need to establish a brown bag policy because our code is sort of all over the place. It kind of says we have one and kind of says we don't. Establish rules for library and MAC classes so that, for example, you could have a cooking class, cooking that serves wine, a wine and painting night. I mean, those kinds of things, I'm thinking, you'll see where this goes in a minute. Meet the author night receptions at the library when they have someone. It might be nice to have wine at those things. One rule would be no alcohol left on premises for those things, because all of those are places that there are kids and other people. And any of those events must be approved by the town manager. So it's not just that they can do it, it's that they still have to get approval for something, just to kind of keep an eye on what's going on. Again, these are just ideas that we can shoot them down and chew them up. Facility rental, this wouldn't change much from what we already have, but it's just that more locations would be available. And it does potentially open up our residents using our town for events and things, as opposed to feeling like everything has to go off a mountain. We just make our town more cohesive that way. So those are my thoughts.
man. I think we're going to need to also look at chapter 1, because there's some overlap.
Can I just say, I didn't get into the code, and I had stuff within that, I was thinking that this would be a little higher level that we're figuring out, but they're,
Okay.
I mean, unless you think we should.
No,
I
I just
think-
wanted to point out a
Yeah, yeah.
few things that,
Yeah, it might be good to see.
on the front end, we need to, and to Dunn's point earlier, I see the concern, but we also basically have an ordinance that doesn't correspond with state law. And now they view beer as anything of 8% or less. So that's the state's definition of beer. So if they allow, they don't control anything below 8%, that leaves it to us to do, and if we don't include it in our ordinance that way, then
It just
that
goes to
leaves a
8.
gap.
Right.
So I think that's a straightforward, we change all the references to percentage to 8%.
Wouldn't you just change it to state law?
Then if, in this, and a lot of times would be in favor of that and just saying that
Comply
our
with
standards
state law.
comply with state law, but that just means that if somebody comes to look for our ordinance, and then they're gonna have to turn around and go find out where it tells them that in state law.
Yeah.
So I think that one is straightforward. One of the things I wanted to point out, though, on the very front end that we need to address, and I hadn't had time to talk to Harry about this. If you look at Chapter 2, which I think in some parts of Chapter 1 is referred to as Article 2, which we also need to correct. Look at 8201, Beer Board established powers and duties. The town council should comprise the beer board for the town of Signal Mountain. The beer board shall have the power and duty to regulate the selling, storing for sale, and distributing for sale and manufacturing of beer within the town. So according to that, which establishes and gives the power of the beer board, you really can't deal with brown bagging because it's none of those things. And if we were going to allow having beer at a facility that's not selling or any of those things, it's just not within the power. I don't think that was the intent to limit your ability to do that, but at the time, I don't think any of these things were on anybody's mind,
Or
so
even
it wasn't
yeah.
included. So one of the first things I think we need to do is expand the power and authority of the beer board to deal with things like brown bagging and non-sale consumption, at least on town property. I think that, on the front end, we need to look at that. In looking and talking about the permits and all of that, it does look, if an entity is going to be selling alcohol, beer, that's what we started out focusing on. And state law and wording in our ordinance as well indicates that it doesn't matter what type of permit that is, there's a $250 fee.
But it could be annual.
It
For-
could be annual. It could be annual. If you're selling, it also appears that you also have to pay the $100 privilege tax. 'Cause if you are engaged in the business of selling, it doesn't say how much. So you could have one event and sell beer and have to pay the same $100 privilege tax for that year that Pruitt's does and sells large quantities.
But we
Um,
can't change that.
I don't, and so far, it doesn't appear so. It just says if you're selling, $100 privilege tax. If you get a beer permit, it's $250.
I think for a nonprofit to be able to have an event where you can have wine, or more than one during the year, to pay $350, they'll recoup that.
Right.
Uh,
Now,
But we've got to set it up so that they don't, right now, they'd have to pay it every time.
Right.
based on the way it's written.
Right. And there are some other options in some municipalities. They have, well, let me back up. The state, they have a special occasion permit for alcohol, for liquor and wine, and a 501c whatever,
Three or four.
or a political organization can get up to 12 of those a year. And it's interesting that if they do that, then there are no other requirements about having to have a licensed server
Really?
or having to have food or anything else.
What is a special occasion permit? How much does that cost?
I'm not sure.
$20,000, I'm sure.
No. If you don't turn it in time, there's a $100 late fee to basically get a rush in before you have your event. But they don't, in the code I have, they don't have the fee stipulated, because I assume that may change, but we can
Okay.
look into that.
Yeah, if we can learn more about
So,
that.
so our question, and Harry contacted MTS Legal on it, is could we basically duplicate that scenario with beer? If they were to do that, now, it does sound like they have to apply for one of those each time they have an event. Again, what the cost is, I'm not sure. But, where was I going with that? If, for instance, the Preservation Fund were to apply for that, to have an event with wine, special occasion wine permit, they're a 501c3, theoretically, they could get that, and all they would need from us is a letter saying that they have permission to hold the event on our property. Now,
That's not a beer board function. That could
that's
just
not
be
a beer
town-
board function, that's ABC. They would handle the permitting on it. The town council, as the council, as opposed to the beer board, would need to say that it's okay to do that, or delegate the authority somewhere else to make that call. Now, that being said, we also do not have any liability coverage associated with alcohol for the town. Our liability coverage excludes alcohol liability. So if something happens, even if we're not involved and we legally can't sell alcohol as a government entity, but it's our property. If something happened there was an accident or whatever, and there was a suit filed and we were named, we would have no coverage. So we would have to, if we're going to consider that, require alcohol liability coverage from the individual or entity that does that. What is now called Public Entity Partners, which is the TML risk pool, which we have had our coverage with for years, actually has access to a program we can sign up for, and through the National League of Cities, an individual or an entity can go into this online program, answer some questions, use our code, and get coverage, including optional liability coverage, alcohol liability coverage. So
Any idea on the cost of
no,
that?
it would depend on the length of the event, the
So it's per
the
event?
circumstances, right.
It's
You-
always per event?
I don't know. I don't know. Literally got that information today.
Okay.
So, last week was really looking at what some of the options were, and then in looking at that and some of the things like, could we mirror what the state does for special occasion permitting, then, all right, if they limit that to 501Cs or political organizations. So that's one option, but if then you're looking at opening it as a venue and an individual may want to rent it, that's going to be another scenario, but this same type of coverage would be available so that if someone wants to have a wedding there or a birthday party or whatever, they have access to that type of liability coverage. So again, that was kind of a long string of, there are
It's encouraging.
different options we need to really look at.
Yeah.
Again, spent quite a bit of time last week looking at, Franklin has some pretty good examples of how they do things. Similar to that, their beer permit application isn't a lot different from ours, but it provides other options.
Can we
And
see
they-
their code on MTS?
Pardon?
Is their municipal code on
Pretty sure.
MTS's site?
Some of it you won't find, I think, well, the application and all is probably not gonna be on there, but
Maybe get that from the
Um,
website.
so, again, that was kind of a long string of, but when you lay out the things you're talking about, absent the actual retail
Mhm.
side of things,
Covers a lot
I
of
I
this.
think you're pretty much in line with what at least feasible options are out there. We just need to look at what exactly the council's comfortable with, and then see if we can nail down how that might work.
Are you
that makes
guys
sense.
comfortable with the next step being or maybe we all to try to look at Franklin's code and read through that? I mean, just as a starting place, and if you want to bring back some details
Sure.
for the next meeting?
And, you know, one of the things that kind of focused my attention there was that they do have events on municipal properties. And so they figured something out, whether it's exactly what we want or not. I think that would be a good place to start and see if what they have provides a comfort level that we're looking for. And you said Alicia's out this week?
Yeah, she actually
Yeah.
called me back
Oh, is
today,
she?
but
Okay.
she's out, and she's gonna, Alicia Hodge with MTS is gonna send me some, I told her what you all wanted to look at, and she's gonna take a look and see if she can come up with some other code provisions that address what we want, what you all
Okay.
might want.
Good.
Well, I think that sounds like a really good start.
Mhm.
I think one of the more complicated aspects of what you're talking about is going to be the cooking class or the art class or people do that all over, but I would bet there are not too many of them in government buildings. That's gonna be the complicated part of it in terms
Yeah.
of liability and all of that.
I even thought, if the director of the entity had the right licensing, in a sense, that would be the town doing that, and we can't do that.
Mhm.
But someone could come in and rent the class and have an event.
If the rental arrangement with teachers was a little different than it is now, I think that could,
Could maybe work. But again, I'm thinking over at the library, when they have an author come through and, talk about their books. They would like to have, a wine and cheese reception after that. Is that the town doing that, or would that have
generally
to
when we
be?
do things like that, it's the library is bringing them in and doing a program.
Is it possible that the library's new status might cover them?
I don't think so.
If Friends of the Library, which is not the town, did that, that might cover them?
Municipal building.
No, but so is the MAC, so is Signal Mountain Playhouse. And we passed an ordinance, or somebody did a long time ago,
Right.
to exempt those buildings. So we could fix that for all those, but if a group like, that's one I should have meant, Friends of the Library, they're they're raising money specifically to put an addition on a municipal building.
And I would certainly defer to Harry on this. They're not a 501.
They might have
something.
to become that.
If they did, that would be another issue. But pretty much all the municipalities that have adopted that approach have stayed with 501c3 or 501c and political organization, and some have just stayed with 501cs and not, which I don't know how likely it is that a political organization would have a function up here, but a lot of places left that off and just went with 501c. So that would be my only thing on the front end, is that even if it is an entity, it has the necessary status to meet that requirement. That is one of the other things that we and it sounds like we may want to, in one place, basically we've said that you can have alcohol, you can have beer at MAC, but then another place it seems to indicate that also applies to wine and all, but the beer board doesn't have the authority to provide that authorization, so we need to look at that a little closer.
There's several things that refer to other places that
Right.
we came across quite a few, that a lot of changes
Yeah.
that will need to be made.
It
All
also says that we're going to hire beer inspectors.
Okay?
Don't know that
Is
we've
that like a
ever done
taster?
You want that?
Be a lot of applications.
We have a volunteer down here at the end of the
Yeah,
table.
it's the only board that's easy to get people to be on. All right, tentative agenda for the September 9th meeting. We've created some
Right
things,
now,
some
we're
work for
Yeah,
you.
we've
in-
created
yeah.
a few.
finishing up that, but
May look at my agenda.
I don't think we have any other ordinances in the works. And I take that back. It is possible that we may have adoption of new building codes, electrical codes, plumbing codes, all that. It's time to do that. We're working towards getting those ready for council. So that is a possibility, but not to the point that I already have it on the agenda.
I think we have to do something to hold our feet to the fire on getting the website updated, which means if you guys could schedule a meeting with whoever's going to review it.
I actually meant to ask you about that today when we
Okay.
touched on that.
It'd be great if we
We can
had
do that
something to
this-
present by the next council meeting, because there's going to be some work that the departments will have to do and that we'll have to do, and some of it's volunteers doing it.
You give me a call tomorrow morning and we'll
Okay.
see what we can schedule.
Other business? Would you mind, Cheryl, giving an update on where things are at the MAC as far as restoration? It'd be great to get an update from Boyd on where we are at the MAC in terms of potential occupancy permit, because the Signal Mountain Playhouse, we're kind of moving into that season again. They're going to be wondering whether or not they can use it. So,
Well, things are really looking up, and it's very exciting. We took down the drop ceiling in the lobby and had some sheetrock installed, which when we took down the drop ceiling, there was all that wonderful crown molding from all those years ago that was fairly good condition. So that has been done. Our trusty electrician's coming tomorrow to hook the lights up in the lobby. And you painted the ceiling. Thank you. Anyway.
it's really why we're doing this.
We dug around down in the boiler room and found what we assumed to be one of the large original schoolhouse fixtures from the building, and we are refurbing that at my house even as we speak, and that's going to be hung front and center when you walk in the lobby. We started the work in the theater with paint, and of course, as is going to happen with plaster, your thumping around on it here and there, and you realize there's a bulge in the wall, lower part, left-hand side, up toward the stage.
Don't
So-
push on it.
We already did.
No touch,
So,
don't
so our sheetrock guy's gonna come back and hopefully repair some of that and get that going. But, we've got colors chosen, some's already on the wall. We originally wanted to take out the drop ceiling in the theater and hang sheetrock. Not this year. It's not for a few years. It's not gonna happen for a while, just too expensive. So what we've done is a test right now of putting in black acoustical tiles on the ceiling as opposed to the white. They really look sharp with the colors that we've got, and it's coming right along. So as soon as the painting's done, sheetrock, painting, clean all those chairs, refurbish the rest of them, the original theater chairs. They will go back in, and then we will be pretty darn ready, except for the heat and air, so hopefully that will take care of itself before too long.
The painting, for the most part, is being done by 3 people.
Uh-huh.
Angie, Cheryl, and Dick. And part of the reason they haven't been able to have volunteers come in is because
It's the old part of the
it's
building.
because of the old part of the building, and there's
Yeah.
not an occupancy, and we sort of got a
Yeah.
special dispensation for the
Yeah,
restoration folks to come in. So on to when it opens, it'd be great to get more help.
Mhm.
oh, and oh, sorry, don't want to take away your moment here. Room 1, original classroom room 1, which is going to be the new conference room for the general public, for whoever needs a nice little conference meeting room. It is so close, it basically needs a couple of touches of paint here and there and new carpet, and we're good to go in that room. So one more room, almost done. Yeah.
The, hopefully, final inspection from the State Fire Marshal is scheduled for day after tomorrow. Eric did another walkthrough today. There's just a few things. Our guys have been down there placing ceiling tiles. The rec guys went in and actually put bollards in around the valve outside. We had a quote to do that for a few $1,000s and looked at it, and as he normally does, Jared goes, well, I can
I
do
can
that. And they did. So there's just a few more things, and as of earlier today, Chief Mitchell said he's pretty confident we can get those knocked out, and we're going to keep that scheduled for Wednesday. And if there's anything that prevents a CO, it has got to be very minor and something to be very quickly taken care of. They've been up a couple of times recently and walked through, and everything's been checked off on, and nothing new's come up, and we just about have all of that knocked out. So,
Excellent.
looking good.
All right. Anybody else have any other business?
Nope.
We are adjourned. Turn your mics off.